Seattle didn't just tweak a few neighborhood zoning rules. In 2026, the city changed how many homes can go on a lot, how much square footage can be built, and how tall a project can go, and what may actually be feasible on the typical Seattle neighborhood lot. If you're wondering whether these new rules could affect your property value or what may be possible on your lot, I'll put my contact information below. Now, I want to make this simple. This is not going to be a zoning lecture. I just want to show you what changed from 2025 rules to the 2026 rules, and what that means in plain English, and why it matters if you own a property in Seattle, because this does not mean every lot suddenly became a gold mine. There are still plenty of things that can kill feasibility in the real world. Before we get into the rule changes, let's make sure we're talking about the same thing. NR stands for neighborhood residential. A lot of people still think of this as what used to be called single-family zoning, and that name change matters because these areas are no longer being viewed as places just for one detached house on a lot. That does not mean every lot suddenly turned into an apartment site, but it does mean the city is thinking about these neighborhoods in a broader way than it used to. And here's why this zoning matters so much. If you look at a citywide zoning map, you can see just how much of Seattle falls into neighborhood residential. These are the traditional house neighborhoods a lot of homeowners still think of as single-family areas. So when the rules change here, this is not some side conversation. It affects a huge number of ordinary homeowners, blocks, and neighborhoods across the city. Now, before we get into 2026, you need a quick picture of what Seattle had already done in 2025. Because 2026 did not come out of nowhere. The simple version of the 2025 rules was this. On a typical residential neighborhood lot, Seattle was generally allowing 4 homes per lot, or 6 if the property was close enough to major transit, or if at least 2 of the homes were affordable. So 2025 had already opened the door. The 2026 update did not create this conversation from scratch. It changed the details in ways that can materially affect what actually fits on a lot. The 2025 version also had a simpler way of controlling building size. The city used something called FAR, which stands for floor area ratio. Don't let that term scare you. It is basically just a math formula the city uses to help set the maximum building size on a lot. So if you had a typical 5,000 square foot lot and the code allowed a 1.2 FAR, you would take 5,000 square feet times 1.2. That gives you about 6,000 square feet total floor area to work with. That does not mean every bit of that is easy to use. You still have setbacks, you still have stairs, layout, parking, and other things that can affect the actual design, but as a simple starting point. That is what FAR is doing. In 2025, once you got to 4 or more units, the max FAR was generally 1.2. Height was generally 32 feet, side setbacks were generally 5 feet, and lot coverage was generally 50%, although one unit project had some tighter limits. Now here's the biggest change in the 2026 version, and this is the part most people will miss if they just skim the headline. In 2025, the simple story was mostly 4 homes on a lot, or 6 near major transit or with affordability. In 2026, the city made that more nuanced. Now the code says the number of dwelling units allowed on a lot is the greatest of 3 tests. 1 unit per 1,250 square feet for attached and detached housing, or 1 unit per 600 square feet for stacked flats, or the familiar baseline of 4 units or 6 units if the lot is within 1/4 mile of a major transit stop, or if at least 2 of the units are affordable. That's a much bigger change than it may sound like at first, because now the size of the lot matters more, the type of housing matters more, and the larger lot can have very different development story than the smaller one, especially if someone is looking at stacked flats, which basically means homes stacked on top of each other, more like a small condo or apartment building, instead of a more traditional detached product. Now, this is where the zoning starts to get real, because just hearing that a lot may now allow more units does not tell you the full story. The other big question is how much actually building can fit on the site. And this is where FAR comes back in. The easiest way to think about it is this. Density helps tell you how many homes may be allowed. FAR tells you how much building you may have to work with, and that matters. Because 6 units on paper can sound great, but if the building envelope is too tight, those 6 units may not be very practical. In the 2025 version, once you got to 4 or more units, the max FAR was generally 1.2. And the 2026 version, at the higher density tier, the FAR can go to 1.6. And for stacked flats, it can even go higher to 1.8, and in some cases, 2.0. So on the same lot, the 2026 rules can allow meaningfully more building area than the 2025 version did. Then you have the shape of the box itself, height, setbacks, and lot coverage. The base height is still generally 32 feet, but now in certain situations, the code allows up to 42 feet. The side setbacks also allow more flexibility in some situations, and the lot coverage rule became simpler. So in 2026, it's not just about squeezing in more units, it's also about making the overall building envelope more workable on some lots. And this is where a lot of people get fooled by the headline. Just because zoning got more flexible does not mean the property is suddenly easy to develop. There are still real-world constraints that can kill a deal. The first bucket is the site itself. Trees, steep slopes, wetlands, creeks, critical areas, and other environmental constraints. I have seen trees kill deals plenty of times. On paper, the zoning may look great, but once you start looking at a tree retention requirements, protected trees, replacement rules, or how tree placement affects the building layout, the whole project can change. The second bucket is infrastructure. Just because a property already has water, sewer, storm, curbs, and sidewalks does not mean the site is ready for this level of density. A lot of those systems were designed for a much lower intensity use. So when someone starts looking at a denser project, the city may require utility upgrades, stormwater improvements, sewer work, water line upgrades, or street improvement permits that were never obvious at first glance. And that is where people get burned. They look at a lot and think, it already has utilities, it already has sidewalks, we should be fine. But then the review starts, and the city may say the existing utilities are not adequate for the new level of density, or the existing curbs and sidewalks may not meet current standard, or the developer may be required to add accessibility improvement, like curb ramps, even if the corner is down the street. That stuff gets expensive fast. And when you combine tree constraints with utility upgrades and frontage improvements, costs that can absolutely kill the economics of a deal or materially reduce what a builder is willing to pay. Zoning may create the opportunity, but trees, utilities, and street improvement costs often decide whether the opportunity is real. So if you're a homeowner, what does all of this actually mean? First, it may mean your property has more potential than it did before. That is real. If the code now allows more units, more square footage, or a more workable building envelope on your lot, that can absolutely matter. But this is where homeowners need to be careful. More zoning flexibility does not mean every lot suddenly became worth a fortune. And it definitely does not mean every lot should be valued the same way. 2 lots on the same street can have very different value, even if they are the exact same zoning. One lot may be flat, clean, close to transit, easy to access, and relatively efficient to develop. The lot next door may have a tree issue, utility utility upgrade costs, awkward frontage requirements, slope, or other constraints that make the project much harder. Same zoning, very different economics. And there's another thing homeowners should understand. Not all builders value the same property the same way. One builder may want to only build one larger house. Another may be looking for a cottage-style project. Another may be interested in stacked flat. And others may pass completely once they start to see utility costs, frontage work, or tree constraints. And this brings me to the bigger idea. A few years ago, this kind of development potential was a lot more limited. It existed in smaller pockets. It was harder to find. And because it was harder to find, the zoning opportunity itself carried more of a premium. And as these rules expand across more neighborhood residential areas, that changes the equation. Once more properties have some version of this opportunity, zoning by itself becomes less rare. And when something becomes less rare, the market starts to get more selective. So in my opinion, the lots that really rise to the top are not just the lots with theoretical density. They're the lots that are actually more ready to go. Cleaner sites, fewer trees, fewer utility upgrade surprises, fewer street improvement problems, better access, better layout, fewer site restriction. Because when more properties have zoning upside, buyers and builders start looking harder at which sites are actually feasible and which ones only look good on paper. When zoning upside becomes more common, the biggest premium often shifts to the lots that are actually easiest to build. So the bottom line is this: Seattle's 2026 neighborhood residential rules may create more opportunity on a lot of properties, but not every lot is going to benefit the same way. The zoning may be more flexible, but the real value still comes down to the actual site, the likely constraints, and finding the right buyer for that specific property. If you own a property in Seattle and want to understand whether these changes could affect your property's value, development potential, or the type of buyer your lot may attract, reach out. I can help you look at the zoning, identify the site constraints, and better understand what your property may really be worth in this market. If this was helpful, like the video and subscribe for more tips on how to better understand your property's development potential and maximize its value.